Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So today I thought it could be fun to take a little trip down memory lane in that let's answer a question. So since Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction, Diablo 2 Resurrected has definitely changed in a lot of ways. Most notably is the existence of the Sunder Charms. Now, in the previous version of the meta, there were only two ways to break resistances. Literally only two. And those two ways were Conviction and lower resistance. And unless you were a Paladin that actually had access to the Conviction aura, you were more often than not using Infinity. Infinity! And there was practically no way to use lower resistance except like a lower res wand with charges. It was a very difficult thing to get. There was another item. It was Medusa's Gaze, which unfortunately Medusa's Cage had like a strength requirement of like 225 or something, which pretty much put it off the table for most characters. And it was also on struck. Now, in general, the Conviction and lower resistance were very poor ways of breaking resistance. Even if you had Infinity, even if you had lower resistance charges, the vast majority of the monsters, I would say roughly about like 80% plus of those monsters were unbreakably immune. This means that in Diablo 2 Resurrected, well, or Diablo 2 Lord of Destruction, the majority of the builds were just not viable. Fire builds, cold builds, lightning builds, pretty much any build that had to do with an immunity, including physical builds, were oftentimes very difficult to break. Now, physical did have its own way of lowering resistance, and those two were Decrepify and Amplify damage. Which were the only ways that you could break physical immunities in that particular way. So in general, like there was just not a lot of good ways to break immunities. Now, because of this, the meta of the game shifted toward Conviction and lower resistance. Now, in Diablo 2 Resurrected, not Diablo 2 LOD, in fact, let's go ahead and close LOD, as beautiful as LOD is, and let's bring up Diablo 2 Resurrected so we can talk about that. I got shortcuts right on my desktop. Let's just click one, shall we? So in general, when it came to Diablo 2 Resurrected, they started adding in Sunder Charms. Now, Sunder Charms didn't necessarily change a super huge amount about the game. Now, this is the very interesting thing about Sunder Charms, is that Sunder Charms, let's go here. Sunder Charms didn't really change anything about the game. The game stayed the same. And because of this, a lot of people who play Diablo 2 Resurrected haven't really quite shifted from the mentality of Diablo 2 LOD, which is that Infinity is king and lower resistance is king. But the thing is that they're not anymore. Right? So one thing that you have to get straight right off the bat is that in Diablo 2 Resurrected, lower resistance and conviction, while amazing, are nowhere near as useful and nowhere near as powerful as they were in Diablo 2 LOD. And this has to do with the fact that negative enemy resistance, which is a stat that appears on gear, is far more powerful than negative resistance in the form of conviction and lower resistance. And this has to do with the 1/5 penalty, right? So what are the primary methods of gaining negative resistance? Well, there's a lot of ways that you can gain negative resistance in this game. Many of them involve utilizing uniques, rune words, and various other pieces of equipment that can give you large amounts of negative res. In fact, for instance, one very popular item that only became popular essentially after Diablo 2 Resurrected and the Sunder Charms existence is one of my favorites, which is the Wizendraw. So the Wizendraw is a unique item that has a massive, I mean, absolutely chongus massive negative resistance of up to negative 35% resistance. It's also a unique item instead of a rune word, which is very key to the conversation that we're going to be having today, which is that rune words are capable of negative resistance, but they're not capable of having a socket for you to put more negative resistance into. This means that in many situations, rune words became obsolete in those situations because they could not provide the negative resistance that the other items could. An example, right? So in this particular case with the Wizendraw, you can socket this with the new Guardian Jewel, which has negative 10% resistance, giving you a massive Chongus, negative 45%. Negative 45% enemy cold res. And negative 45% enemy cold res is not subject to the penalty. Now, this is proof in the pudding of exactly what we're going to be talking about today, is that although Conviction, at its maximum, can give negative 150% enemy resistance, the problem is that when it is applied to an immune target, that is divided by 5, which means that it is only equal to 30%. Which means that even if you have maximum conviction, which Infinity is not, by the way, even if you have maximum conviction, it's only 30% minus from a target. Infinity is actually more like, I think it's like 17 or something. I can't remember the exact amount. It hardly matters. It's basically nothing. So you have a lot of items in the game that suddenly become targets for these new jewels, these Guardian jewels, the Rainbow Facets, which already existed in the game, unique items that have negative resistance on them. Of course, also rune words that have negative resistance as well, like a Crescent Moon has negative 35% lightning resistance, which is extremely powerful. Infinity manages to hang in there because Infinity has a massive amount of negative resistance as well. So if you ever take a look at Infinity, and we can take a look at Infinity real quick. So Infinity, if you actually self-wield it, this only works if you're wielding it yourself. You cannot get it if it's on a Mercenary, right? But if you're wielding it yourself, you get a massive negative 55% enemy lightning resistance, which is one of the reasons why Infinity stays relevant in today's Diablo 2 Resurrected, despite the fact that it's kind of been outpaced by other items. And this is because if you self-wield it on a Sorceress, you can get that negative 55% enemy lightning resistance, which is actually far stronger than the conviction aura that's on the item. Because the conviction aura that's on the item is only a level 12 conviction, and level 12 conviction divided by 5 is only going to give you, what is that? 1285. Let's do a quick math because I don't remember the exact number. So 85 divided by 5. Yeah, 17. So I was right earlier. So 17%. So 17% is obviously far less than negative 55, right? So this changes the meta and how you approach characters. You approach characters from the venue of, well, how do I get as much negative enemy resistance as possible? Well, the main methods for getting negative enemy resistance, if you were to list them out, so negative enemy resistance sources. The main sources are number 1, uniques. Number 2, rune words with ELR or etc. And number 3 is facets / guardian jewels. Now, guardian jewels are something that you can put in basically any piece of equipment. And we can even go even further and go Sunder. The new renewed Sunder charms also have some negative resistance on them, which is actually very useful. So if you're using Runeword, like if I'm using Treachery, Treachery is a nice rune word. It's a very good rune word. It has tons of increased attack speed. It has fade. It has, like venom and stuff like that. Depending on what you're trying to do on your character, it's an amazing rune word. But it doesn't have any sockets for facets, right? So if you're trying to get as much negative res as you possibly can, items like Treachery, items like Enigma, items like Chains of Honor, they don't give you negative res, right? So the problem is that you need something that is going to give you negative res, but then comes down to the fact of, okay, well, I'd like negative res, but I would also like, plus the skills. I would also like faster cast. I would also like, resistances and so forth and so on. So you start to think like, well, I don't want to just put on like a 4-socket or armor or like a 4-socket Archon plate and just fill it with facets, because that's silly, because then I'm not going to get any plus to skills. I'm not going to get any faster cast. I'm not going to get any resistances, and so forth and so on, right? So you start to think in your head, you're like, okay, well, what can I put in this slot that will still allow me to get a facet, have my cake and eat it too, essentially, kind of a situation. And so you end up with these sockets, right? So you have 4 sockets on the armor that you can potentially use. You have 6 sockets on your weapon that you can potentially use. You got up to like 3 sockets on your helmet that you could potentially use. You got 4 sockets on a shield that you could potentially use, which means that as far as facets go, if you were to add that all up, you can potentially have 6 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4, which is a total of 17 sockets. Did I get that right? Yeah, 6, 3, 4, 4. Yeah. So 17 total sockets is what you're looking at. Now, you can have 1 facet in every single one of those if you wanted to. So you could potentially have times 5, right? So 5, which is going to give you a total of negative 85% enemy whatever resistance. Lightning, fire, ice, poison. But it's not enough to have the facets. You need a piece of equipment that's going to give you what you want and also give you facet slots. In fact, more than one would be great, right? So items like, as an example, let's pull up an item that wasn't particularly the best item in the world before in D2LoD. It was good, but it wasn't amazing, but became much better in Diablo 2 Resurrected. And the reason is because it comes with 2 sockets. It's called Heaven's Light Mighty Scepter. Heaven's Light Mighty Scepter is a very nice scepter. It's not like super duper crazy, but it is good. It has plus 3 to Paladin skills, which is amazing. And it has 2 sockets. So this is an item that basically became more useful in the current meta of the game because it has 2 sockets, it has plus 3 skills, right? So if you want plus the skills, which most people do, and you also want facet slots, there's very few options, right? Like you can use a grief for damage, but a grief is not going to give you like negative fire res or negative lightning res or negative cold res, right? So if you want to do 2 facets, which Heaven's Light does, you can basically run this, get plus 3 to skills, and put like 2 cold facets or fire facets or lightning facets or even poison facets if that's what you want to do, or even guardian jewels. Like this is an item that became more powerful with the advent of Sunder charms. Now, why did this occur exactly? Well, it occurred because in the previous versions of the game, so in D2LoD, negative enemy resistance could not break immunities. So even though the negative resistance always existed in Diablo 2 Diablo 2 LoD, it was not something that just suddenly appeared. It was always there. It just was never really very good because you couldn't actually break enemy resistances with it. And you still can't, right? You still can't break enemy resistances with the negative enemy resistance. You need the Sunder charm. And this is where the Sunder charm comes in. So the Sunder charm finally allowed the negative enemy resistance to work at its full potential by breaking the immunity of the monster for you and then allowing the negative enemy resistance to do its job, which made these things so much more potent, right? So the whole meta of the game shifted toward negative enemy resistance, away from conviction, away from lower resistance. Now, are lower resistance and conviction still useful? Yes, they're still useful, but they're not a priority over negative enemy resistance anymore. Negative enemy resistance is by far more powerful than conviction would ever be. I can give you a couple examples. Let's go to a character that I've actually designed several times. This is my Sanic Thor character. And I'm going to show you the difference between negative enemy resistance and not. In a practical example, mind you, right? So this is a character that is designed, it's a barbarian that's designed entirely around lightning damage. It works quite well. And he uses 2 crescent moons. Crescent Moons are negative 35% enemy lightning resistance. They're extremely powerful in the lightning field. In fact, a lot of lightning characters will actually use these in lieu of plus the skill weapons or wands or anything of that nature, because in general, the negative 35% enemy lightning resistance is just that powerful. But as a barbarian, I have the ability to wear two. Right? Now, if I were to utilize an Infinity on my Mercenary, or if I had a Necromancer casting full version of lower resistance, or if I had a Paladin running beside me, running the full version of Conviction, right? What is that versus? Like right now, if you were to compare the two side by side to each other and say, okay, we have a Paladin who is running Conviction alongside the Paladin, right? So we got a Paladin running level 25 Conviction. And then let's even be generous. Let's say there's also a Necromancer who is running level 20 plus lower resistance, right? And we come across a monster that is Lightning Enchanted. Lightning Enchanted adds 75% resistance to a monster, which already has a base of 50% resistance, which means that the monster is going to be at 125% resistance, right? This means that I'm going to be fighting a monster that's immune. Well, in situation number 1, with the Paladin and the Necromancer, I would be looking at negative 30 from Conviction, and I would also be looking at negative, like, 12 for, let's even be generous, and let's say 15 from lower resistance, which is going to bring our 125%. So our 125% is going to go down by 30, and then it's going to go down by 15, which means the monster is going to be at 80% resistance, which is really nice, right? However, let's take the example of our Thor Barbarian, which is just running 2 Crescent Moons and has a Sunder Charm. So in the case of the Sunder Charm and the 2 Crescent Moons, my boy is going to be rocking against that 125%. He's going to set that to 95, so it's going to go down to 95 from the Sunder Charm. The Sunder Charm is then applying that, and then the negative resistance, which is 35% on both weapons, is also going to apply. And we are down to 25%. So in situation number 2, we don't have Conviction, we don't have lower resistance, but we still have negative 35% and negative 35%, and we also have the Sunder, which makes us down to 25% resistance. You can see how negative enemy resistance is just far more powerful in general than Conviction and lower resistance. Now, Conviction and lower resistance still work surprisingly well versus non-immune targets, but who cares? You might say to yourself, well, but the non-immune targets die really fast. And I would counter that argument with, but the non-immune targets always die really fast. This is the trap that we find ourselves in, which is that negative resistance is just far more powerful. And this is the case for physical damage too, and actually has bumped up with magic resistance as well. So magic resistance has also kind of run into this situation. Now, interestingly enough, you run into situations like this all the time. You're like, okay, well, I would like more negative resistances. And it's hard to get negative resistances when you run rune words, right? So if you're running all rune words, if you've got Hodo and you've got Enigma and you've got, like freaking, like, it gets to the point where the more rune words you have, the less slots you have for negative resistances. An interesting option for this is like the body piece. So let's talk about the body piece. A lot of people like to run Enigma. Sure, I'm not a big Enigma fan, right? But if you want +2 to skills, Chains of Honor is a good choice. It has lots of resistances. It has very good stats, right? But Chains of Honor doesn't have a socket. So what becomes an option, in fact, the only option, and I've gotten ridiculed for this because I call it out as an option in the game, but the meta shifts the game toward Arcane's Valor. Arcane's Valor is an armor that is a unique. It is the only +2 skill armor in the game that has a socket, right? So you think about it for a second. How many +2 skill armors are there in the game? How many +2 skill armors have a socket? Can have a socket? Not very many of them, right? So you find yourself in a situation where, like, well, if I need +2 skills, then and I need a facet, well, then Arcane's Valor becomes the only option. It's not the best option, as in, like, there's a plethora of options before you. It's the only option. Like, there's only one +2 armor in the game that has a socket in it, which is +2 all skills. Now, there's some, like, meager other options for other classes. Like, for instance, some of the class specific like set pieces have tab skills, which could potentially be useful to your specific build. But for the most part, if you want +2 and you want a facet, then this is the go-to piece. And the same thing goes for the beautiful faster cast armor, which is, of course, the Skin of the Viper Magi. Skin of the Viper Magi is like the only body piece that has 30% faster cast and +1 to all skills with all resistances that you can also put a facet into, right? So Skin of the Viper Magi becomes a very powerful option in the new meta of negative resistance because, in general, you want more negative resistance. And the more negative resistance you have, the better your character functions and the easier you're able to deal with immune targets. So across the board, lots of different uniques come up that may not have been the best in the game before, but they're definitely the best now. Like, a very strong and very powerful option at this point is Crown of Ages. Crown of Ages is a plus skill helmet that has 2 sockets. It's one of the only plus skill helmets that has 2 sockets. So if you want facet slots, Crown of Ages is a +1 helmet. It has physical damage reduction. It has all resistances, faster hit recovery. All of these are very nice things, but they're not enough to bring you to the table. What brings you to the table is those juicy 2 sockets that you can put facets into. So as a cold character, not a cold sorceress, because cold sorceresses generally want night wings, but as a, like, cold boson, as a fire boson, as a like a bunch of different characters, facets become more powerful in general because negative resistance is just far stronger than other options, and you just need lots of it, right? Well, this is kind of the crazy thing about items like this, is that these unique items started to become more meta than the rune words. Like, in the past, it would not have been a lie to say that rune words were better than just about any uniques, blah, blah, blah. And there were exceptions, of course, but this was mostly true in D2LoD. It's not really true anymore. In D2R, the truth is that enemy negative enemy an enemy let's just say, like, ELR, EFR, ECR, EMR, these are just like abbreviations, etc., became the priority. And while there are some rune words, there are still some rune words that have good negative resistances. There are things like Phoenix, which is ridiculously expensive. Does have negative enemy fire. It has EFR. The problem with Phoenix is it has no plus to skills, which kind of makes it a poor choice in a lot of situations unless you can get the plus to skills elsewhere, especially when you have other options that do have negative resistances and do have plus to skills. Like, for instance, an option that wasn't really the greatest option for a long time, but suddenly became a good option, is actually Mang Songs. So Mang Songs is one of the few items in the game that offers negative resistance, and it also offers plus to skills, right? So in the case of something like, you're comparing, say, Phoenix to Mang Songs, well, Mang Songs has +5. Mang Songs has +5 skills versus 0, by the way, because Phoenix has no negative, no plus skills. It also has negative resistance, so it has negative 15%, negative 15, 15, and it can also put a facet in there, which means you can easily go to negative 25 using one of the Guardian Jewels, which means that we're talking about some crazy negative resistance and plus to skills. So this is where the problem comes in, is that stacking negative ELR by itself is not good enough, because as you stack negative ELR from sources like Phoenix, the problem is that you're losing a large number plus the skills, and the base damage of the skills go down, and so you're losing too much for the negative resistances that you're gaining. So as the game started to get more and more balanced around these negative resistance, Sunders, essentially, as the Sunder charms themselves, people started to realize that, yeah, okay, well, negative resistance is more important, and plus the skills is more important than, things like infinity, things like low resistance. But also at the same time, like, the rune words themselves aren't really doing me very good. A lot of the times, people will use things like Hodo. Hodo is a very powerful item. But the problem with Hodo is that Hodo has no negative resistance, and it also has no sockets for negative resistance. So if you take a look at Hodo, Hodo is amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing rune word. It has beautiful 40% faster cast. It has +3 to skills, and it also has all resistances, but no facets, right? Unless you're playing something like a Hammerden, specifically, that doesn't need negative resistance. Like, it's not really a great option for most characters because you need negative resistance on most characters, right? If you're a fire sorceress, you need negative fire. If you're a lightning sorceress, you need negative lightning. If you're a paladin who's running, like Holy Shock, you're probably going to be using Crescent Moon, and so forth and so on. And as amazing as Hodo is, and as meta as Hodo was, it's not really that great in the current version of the game because, again, it doesn't offer you a facet slot for you to actually put any negative resistance into. And oftentimes people will make the mistake of wasting their facet slot. So, like, for instance, on a enchant sorceress, you might be using a demon machine. Well, demon machines are absolutely amazing weapons, and you can make a crazy enchant demon machine character. And people will take a shale rune and put it in their demon machine. And this is really, really stupid. The reason is because as a sorceress, especially if you're running a full sorceress build with enchant and demon machine, one of the things that you're going to notice is that, well, you don't have very many facet slots, right? You're not wearing a shield because you have a bow on, a crossbow. So you don't have the 4 facet slots that you would normally have on your shield. You can't wear Phoenix. You can't put like a 4-socket shield and put 4 facets in it. Your helmet is more often than not taken up by either Flickering Flame, which has negative 15% enemy lightning resistance, which I think is a mistake, by the way, now, or the beautiful new helmet called Hellwarden's Will. Hellwarden's Will is a much better option because it allows you to get a facet, and it also gives you increased attack speed. Anything that allows you to get more facets on your character, with, like, for Enchant Sorceress, for instance, is going to be good. And if you utilize your weapons socket for a Shale Rune, you're giving up one of your facet slots, which is just dumb. Right? So instead of giving up a facet slot, you get your attack speed elsewhere. Get it from your gloves, get it from your helmet with the Hellwardens, get it from a belt, get it from an armor. Like, I don't know where you're going to get it from, but, like, don't give up a facet slot for it specifically, right? Because that's a negative 10% Guardian Jewel that you could be using in your weapon, which is a huge boost to your overall damage. And this has been the case across the board, is that a lot of the times you have to make the choice of, like, do I want no more negative res or do I not? Now, what's a good amount of negative res? So let's ask that question. So what is an acceptable level of negative resistance? Now, I've actually played around with this a lot, and my personal opinion is negative 40% is your target. Negative 40% is where you should be hoping to hit, because at least with negative 40%, for the most part, whenever you are fighting an immune target, the immune targets will be killable, and you'll be doing a significant portion of your damage output. Anything less than negative 40 and it starts to slow down considerably, and if you're too low, you probably won't be able to kill anything. Higher than negative 40% is great. In fact, you can bring a monster down, technically, to negative 100%, which means that having a really large amount of negative res is not a bad thing. In fact, the more negative res you have, the more damage you do, and the immune targets will be less and less, resistant to your hits. There is something to note, though, about negative res in terms of how it dishes out damage, and once you hit 0, the equation changes. So we're going to do a couple math problems here, and we're going to say that we have a target. We're doing 10,000 damage, and the target has 95% resistance. We're going to subtract 50% resistance from that to get a 45% resistant monster, right? Then we're going to have the same exact thing happen, except this time we're going to have a monster that's 0% resistant, and then we're going to subtract 50% from that, right? So when you look at the damage numbers, you're going to see 10,000 minus 45%, which is going to give us a total of 5,500 damage. Now, if we were to do the same thing in the other equation, which is where we have 10,000 damage minus, this would be, we're actually going to be at negative 50%, so we're going to go plus 50%. In this particular case, you can see that we gained a rather large amount of damage, 5,000 damage increase from that, right? But the thing about the top number is you'll notice that we're not gaining damage, we're actually reclaiming damage. So in the case of the upper part, we're just trying to get back to our 10,000 number. And although technically we gained about the same amount of damage, you'll notice that without the negative 50% up here, we would only be doing like 500 damage. But without the negative 50% here, we would be doing 10,000 damage, right? So as you approach 0, negative resistance becomes less important, and it's still good, don't get me wrong, it still will add damage to your character, but getting a monster to 0% is the goal, and then anything else over 0% is icing on the cake, essentially. Think about it like that. Like icing on the cake. Bringing them down below 0% is icing on the cake. And at this point, generally, when you have things like skill damage, well, you know, like plus fire skill damage, plus lightning skill damage, whatever, it essentially becomes equivalent to like enemy lightning resistance, enemy fire resistance. They're basically about the same, except on the Sorceress. So the Sorceress is a special beast, and skill damage is very bad for lightning and fire, but not ice. And this is because instead of actually functioning as multiplicative damage, it's actually just functioning as an additive bonus to the mastery. To give you an example of how this functions, like if I look at my character's panel right here and I see that my damage is, you know, like 1,338, and I say I wanted to add damage to that. Well, if I was adding damage to it, I could add damage directly to that, and I could give it like, you know, 1,338 plus like 50%, and I could get like 600 damage. The problem is that mastery is enhancing the base, not the total. And when you add skill damage on a Sorceress with lightning and fire, it's actually enhancing the base only, not the total number, which means that you're only getting a very small fraction of damage by comparison to other characters. So in general, ELR, in terms of lightning and fire, is always superior on Sorceresses. I'm not really sure what else to talk about here. I've already been ranting for like 33 minutes, but it's a fun topic. It's fun how things changed in Diablo 2 to make way for negative resistance, and how gearing changed in general. Now, of course, there are people out there who will still slap an Enigma on every single character, but when you're trying to get optimal damage output, most of the time Enigma is not it. Enigma is just traveling. It's just the ability to teleport. Whereas, you know, like if you have the appropriate piece of armor on with the facets in it that you need, you could boost your damage massively as a result. Utilizing those sockets for your benefits. Things like these Guardian Jewels really kind of buff that up even further, because they can have literally negative 10% and, you know, plus 10%, you know, to skill damage. So you can literally get a negative 10, a plus 10 jewel, which you have to have a socket for. And this also applies to the Guardian Jewel. So this particular one is the physical protector stone, and this, of course, applies to the physical side of things. And this actually has a bug in it where basically the min and max damage start to get bugged out by the enhanced damage. You're actually not supposed to have enhanced damage and min and max damage on the same jewel. It actually causes a like catastrophic bug where your enhanced damage only applies to like the min or the max only, which kind of breaks your entire character. And this brings up a very interesting thing. So where can you place this where it doesn't cause the bug? Well, you cannot place it in an armor because that causes the bug. You cannot place it in a helmet because that causes the bug. And you cannot place it in a shield because that also causes the bug. So where can you put it? In your weapon. But the thing is that a lot of people don't utilize weapons that have facet slots. Like, for instance, Grief doesn't have a slot for the Protector Stone, so it doesn't work. In fact, there's a lot of weapons in the game that do have slots that can work with a Protector Stone, but in general, people don't use them, right? So this shifts the meta a little bit toward those items. A very interesting, like, alternative item for this would be something like the Redeemer, which actually, like, crazy damage on the Redeemer. There's a lot of very good, like, physical damage weapons, but it's definitely an oddity in the socket verse. The socket verse. Bone Break is something that a lot of people ridiculed for a long time, but after significant testing, honestly, I feel like Bone Break is probably one of the best things for physical damage characters. I've tested it in ad nauseum, and utilizing a Bone Break with Amplify damage, you want it with Amplify damage, but utilizing a Bone Break with Amplify damage on a physical damage character pretty much entirely removes any physical immunity and allows you to kill physically immune monsters with ease. Like, absolutely no problem whatsoever. It's an absolutely amazing addition for the melee characters. I don't really understand the hate for it because, quite honestly, after my testing, I proved conclusively that having a Bone Break in your inventory with Amplify damage can literally multiply the speed at which you kill an immune target by a factor of like 10. And I mean like a factor of 10. The monster goes from almost completely invincible with Amplify damage to dead almost instantaneously. Overall, I think the meta changed for the better. I really like what Sunder Charms did for the game is that they changed the way that we geared our characters. And not just changed the way we geared our characters, but made us utilize more pieces of equipment that in the past we hadn't really considered. Like things like Wizendraw, which up until like Sunder Charms were announced, was just kind of a passing thought. Like, oh yeah, it has negative 35% enemy cold resistance, but you can't really utilize it, right? Because unfortunately, cold like resistance was one of the most unbreakable resistances in the game. Even if you had a full Paladin conviction, and even if you had a full Necromancer low resistance, most cold monsters were not breakable. They actually had so much resistance to cold that it didn't matter. You were not breaking a cold immune monster, and so Wizendraw was just an absolutely useless piece of crap. And Sunder Charms, what did they do? They made items like this that were once useless because of the inability to break immunities very useful. That's one of the reasons why I really like Sunder Charms in general, is because they basically took the items that already existed within the game and made us think twice about them. Like, made us go back and be like, oh man, with a Cold Sunder, I could totally use a Wizendraw on a Freezing Arrow Amazon. With the Guardian Jewel in there and a perfect bow, I can get, like negative 45% enemy cold resistance, which is absolutely amazing. And items like this became more and more potent. Items like Crown of Ages with 2 sockets, Heaven's Light with 2 sockets, Wizendraw with negative 35% enemy cold resistance. Tons of items started to come to the forefront that were, basically overlooked before, which is a beautiful thing in the games like Diablo 2, because you really do want to see those items come forward and find usefulness, right? There's a beautiful Redeemer right there. Look at that bad boy. 225 to 292. 275% enhanced with 105 grief damage as well. A lot of people don't know this, but Redeemer actually does have grief damage. It has 105, I think it's actually a little bit more than that, grief damage per strike, which is an amazing weapon. And you can socket it. Of course, if you have an ethereal one, you're going to have to put a Zod rune in it, but it is what it is. Even items like Windhammer Ogre Maul started to become more potent potent due to the proccing effects and various ways that you could potentially bypass resistances and immunities, allowing you to bypass physical resistances, of course, which in this particular case would be because you're doing twisters on striking, which is physical damage. So utilizing a bone break with some form of amplified damage like Atmos Scarab could get you the kill speed that you're looking for. I think that's pretty much it when it comes to Sunder Charms and how they kind of change the entire meta of the game. Let me know what you think about like the changes that happened between D2 Resurrected and D2LoD. It's interesting to talk about. It's something that's interesting to think about. Like that, literally, just the inclusion of one item massively overhauled how we looked at our characters and how we geared them. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button, and keep watching.